Africa is our home. It's where life began around 3.6 billion years ago. It's also where our ancestors first walked upright, where they picked up stones and made them into tools, where they started to hunt with spears and catch fish with rudimentary nets. And it's here where the oldest evidence of human life has been found, right here in this archaeological site in Morocco, where scientists recently discovered stone tools dating back 2.6 million years. Our story begins with the emergence of Homo sapiens in Africa around 300,000 years ago. For hundreds of thousands of years before that, various species of the genus Homo had lived across the continent, but it was Homo sapiens who would go on to populate the entire planet. So, what was Africa like when our ancestors first arrived? There were no giraffes, elephants, or great apes. Instead, there were smaller mammals like baboons and mongooses. There were also many species of wild dog, and instead of lions, there were hyenas. But there were birds. There were plenty of birds, because even today, Africa boasts the greatest diversity of birds anywhere in the world. The climate of Africa was also very different. Today, much of the continent is dry and desert-like, but during the Pleistocene epoch, when our ancestors arrived, it was much wetter. This meant that our ancestors didn't have to travel far to find water. In fact, there were lakes, rivers, and pools scattered all over the place. This also meant that there was lots of plant life for them to eat. There were figs, berries, and fruits. There were also nuts and tubers, so our ancestors weren't exactly living in the Stone Age. They were actually living in the nut and tuber age. It may sound hard to believe, but these early humans were probably more like us than like the stereotypical hairy, knuckle-walking caveman. They were intelligent and curious creatures who used their brains to figure out how to use objects in their environment. They weren't satisfied with just eating the fruit as it grew. They wanted to crack open the nut inside, so they picked up stones and hit them against other stones until they broke. This may not sound like a big deal now, but it was a huge leap forward for our ancestors. It was the beginning of the technological era, and it all happened in Africa. Scientists believe that the first tools made in Africa were used for cutting, chopping, and scraping. They were also used for digging up tubers and for defense. As the years went on, our ancestors began to experiment with new materials. They started using bones and shells and even teeth as tools. They also developed more sophisticated tools like knives, spear throwers, and fish hooks. These tools helped them to survive in a variety of environments, from the savanna to the forest to the mountains. And they also helped our ancestors to thrive. In fact, some anthropologists believe that the development of stone tools in Africa led to an explosion of human intelligence. They argue that making tools requires a certain level of cognitive ability, and that this ability can be passed down from one generation to the next. So as our ancestors continued to make and use tools, their intelligence increased and they became more like us. But it wasn't just tools that helped our ancestors survive. Another important factor was their social structure. Early humans lived in groups and they relied on each other for help. They shared food, took care of each other's children, and protected each other from predators. Some anthropologists believe that the development of language also played a role in the survival of early humans. Language allowed them to communicate more effectively, share information, and coordinate their activities. Of course, our ancestors didn't just stay in Africa. Around 1.8 million years ago, a group of Homo erectus migrated to Asia. Another group migrated to Europe around 1.2 million years ago. And eventually, Homo sapiens migrated out of Africa as well. Finally, let's talk about how early humans walked upright. This is another key adaptation that helped them survive. When our ancestors first started walking upright, it was probably a slow and awkward process. But over time, they got better and better at it. They were able to walk further and faster without getting tired, and this ability helped them to escape predators, hunt animals, and gather plants. It also helped them to explore new environments and settle in new places. In fact, some anthropologists believe that the ability to walk upright is what allowed our ancestors to become such a successful species. It gave them the freedom to do things that other primates couldn't do, like make tools, explore new environments, and take care of each other's young. So the next time you're walking down the street, take a moment to appreciate how amazing it is. You're walking upright just like your ancestors did all those years ago. And if you're in Africa, take a moment to appreciate how special it is. You're walking upright on the very continent where life began.